The April 22nd, 2024 City Council Workshop will be called to order. I'd note that Councilor Cowan is absent at the moment, but he will be here shortly. I think where we left our last budget discussion, we were talking about looking for reductions to reduce the total tax levy to at least 6.5%. A number of items were identified. Kelsey circulated a summary with the additions in revenue and the deductions and expenses, and that got us to approximately 6.99%. See if the council has any thoughts or ideas about further reductions to try to reach a 6.5 total tax levy. No comment,
Mr.
no
Mayor.
further comments from the council?
Mr. Mayor, I can make a
Yeah.
comment. I mean, I'd certainly
Councilor
like to
Platt.
have a conversation about the fund balance. I think that's a, I don't know if that's, is that the next
Yeah.
stage of conversation after we rule out?
I think that's the next stage after we've identified any cuts. I think my own opinion is it's a little early for that. I think that we should try to identify how to get down to at least a 6.5 and then talk about potential application of fund balance. If we can't get to 6.5, we can talk about it. Councilor Cowan raised the issue that adding additional fund balance as a one-time measure would be appropriate, given that one of the biggest drivers in the budget is the increase in salaries and associated cost, and the salary side's about, I think, Mr. Manager, 1.8 million unusual one-time amount beyond what we would normally see. So if the council has no further discussion or proposals to cut the budget, I suppose we could move on to the fund balance. Councilor Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.5 or even 6 is too much for me. What I'd like to start on is unfilled positions. I would like to see them froze, especially those that are non-essential or doesn't have some sort of other type of funding to pay for them. And then if there is other funding that's to pay for them, I want to know how long that funding will be available and when it will, that position that we take on is going to come back into the city's budget.
So the manager may be able to help us with this. My recollection from one of the prior meetings was there are no open positions beyond a 90-day tenure of vacancy. They're being filled as they become vacant. So I don't believe that there are any long-term unfilled positions. I think that's the first question. Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
Yeah, that's correct. And the only position that I have frozen that's currently vacant is the position within the assessing office because of the reductions that were done within this budget of delaying the hiring of that position. So that's currently frozen within FY24, where we're in now. It'll continue for 6 months within FY25, and then that position would be hired.
And other than the positions the council talked about earlier that are being added mostly through outside revenue sources, the current vacancies that are in the hiring funnel are mostly police and fire. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes.
Further on that?
Yes, sir. Respectfully, any other, that's what I said. As long as it's essential, we can hire them, but it's got to be essential. There may not be any openings at the second, but as one becomes available, that position should be assessed and find out if it's actually needed, and then if it's not actually needed, that position frozen as a means to try to save a few pennies here and there.
Counselor Gary, can I just ask a clarifying statement? So in your first, you had talked about 6.9 being too high, 6.5, you're still not. So are you saying that if the budget was at 6%, you would vote in favor of that budget? Okay, so we're not trying to get to a number for you, is what I'm understanding.
I would like to see it under 5.
I mean, do you have a number, though? That, I think that's kind of where we're at with the council at this point is, what's that number? And then we can talk about what service reductions get you to that point, because collectively, and I shared this before, is that it's going to require, because of where we're at with the CPIU, it'll require 5 of you to vote in favor of a budget. So the goal tonight is, can we collectively get to that point where you have five individuals that are in consensus of any reductions to move forward? So I guess it would be helpful for the other counselors to know what's that number for you so that they can determine if they're going to build towards that or not.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think the way we left it last time is there was little feedback beyond Councilor Cowan's suggestion of 6.5. So I think that's the whole point, right? What are we driving towards? Because, you know, if we're talking about, if the sense of the council were to get to 5, as perhaps Councilor Gary has suggested, it's a completely different conversation than if we're trying to get to 6.5 or 6. If we're going to 5, we're going to have very, very significant layoffs, probably elimination of certain programs or departments in order to get to that number. So I'd like to hear from the rest of the councilors, what number do they think we should drive towards?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just had a question. My recollection, so correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Manager, that if we looked at this over multiple years, that we're at an average that's under 5%, including this year, from an annual increase?
So if you're looking, yes, absolutely, yeah. I think I had also shared like where we are with in comparison to CPIU. The current proposal puts us about 2% below the 2-year CPIU with the 6.9. It's at 10%. I think it's at 10%. It was 3.7 last year. It's 10% this year. So,
Councilor Mills?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we looked at the budget and we knew we had really 3 choices. We got raise taxes, cut services, or grow the city, and grow the tax revenue into the city through development and growth. And so when we look at the situation that we have here, we have inflation affecting the budget, we have increased union contracts and increased union wages, we have changes in the marketplace, things like the police department having that radical wage pressure on us to maintain police officers. And at the same time, we initiated things to grow the city. And we're looking now at situations where large projects that would have been underway 3 years ago and would be revenue into the city in the next year or two that are not going to be revenue in the city, and directly due to anti-development and areas where people don't want to grow, and we're scaring people away to develop in the city. So now we're stuck with either raising taxes or cutting service. And so I can tell you that I apologize to my constituents because I'm going to vote for this budget, and we're going to raise taxes on our citizens, because I'm not going to cut the police, I'm not cutting fire, I'm not cutting rec. And I think we have some serious things we got to look at in the future. I think there's some things like, I know that the school department's talking about buildings, because I'd rather cut buildings than teachers. And I think we have a capacity issue in the schools, so I'd like to see the school department seriously look at buildings, and I know that they are. But I think we also, as a city, have to seriously look at what we have in the city and how we're gonna generate revenue into our city. Because we're looking at, in the next couple of years, serious cuts or serious tax increases. And Counselor Gary is correct, that we're gonna have to cut. And the manager is right, that it's major layoffs, it's major cuts, Mr. Mayor is correct. And that's what we got. And now we don't have, it's the worst kept secret in town, but, you know, we're not developed, we saved the gravel pit. That was $1 million to $1.5 million that would have been coming into the city in the next year or two, and it's not going forward. And that's real revenue. So I'm gonna vote for the budget.
Any other thoughts about a number to drive to here? Council White?
Just a comment, in my prior job, I would work with staff to try and come up with pay increases that were typically related to the CPIU. Some years we couldn't do that, but we would strive for an average over the number of years. So I agree with Councilor Cowan that if you look at the previous year, which was technically under, if you adjusted for the retroactive pay increases, the average of the 2 years is okay, and it's not great, and I concur with everybody about having angst about raising taxes. But we're in an inflationary environment. We're doing our best to deal with that, and we will definitely have to, you know, pay strict attention to the budget in the coming years.
Anything further? Counselor Wisner or Platts or Walker, thoughts about a number to drive to?
I'm hesitant to throw out a number because I don't have the solution on how to get there. I guess from a principled standpoint, I'd love to see if we could get to 6.5% without rating the fund balance. But you know, I've made certain suggestions, I think, without the full understanding of what those impacts might be. And so, you know, I don't necessarily have a solution. I do think as this conversation progresses towards the fund balance, I do think there's thoughts to be had about, you know, what percentage of our surplus, or at least our forecasted surplus this year, we're willing to spend. I think looking into policies like that moving forward could be helpful. If we're overtaxing our citizens based on what we're spending, perhaps there's an argument for a certain percentage of the fund balance to be returned. I guess, again, without having specific suggestions for how to reduce the budget further, I will say, looking forward, if we are passing this budget, which will be, I think, probably one of the largest increases in a while, and a lot of that has to do with the economy that we're living in, not due to our own irresponsibility by any means. I think we need to be forward-looking, and possibly we always are, but I think we need to be incredibly stringent with our CIP outlook. I think we need to understand how future debt payments will affect taxes in the future. And I think I think it's important to look at these things over years, as Councilor Cowan referred to. And I think we can be on a good track where we have a good average annual increase, but I think this is gonna be a big one. And so we need to be looking at next year and the year after to understand how we can balance this out. And everything that everyone has said is true. This is the situation we're in. And hopefully we've done everything we can to deal with it. I will say, in addition to all of these salary increases, I do believe this is a very responsibly put together budget. I don't see many other areas to cut things from, and I do understand the lopsided impact that these contract negotiations have on the optics of this annual budget.
Councilor Walker?
Yeah, I'd like to say that 6.5 is not my favorite number by far, but I think that's what we're looking at. I think we're going to have to tap into the fund balance in order to get there, and maybe a little bit less than that if we have to. I've been around long enough to know layoffs are something we really don't want to see, and they usually don't work very well for us because it just cuts into everything that we have going, and that's a real tough spot to put the manager and the rest of us councilors in. So I think if we can get somewheres, I'd like to see us get to 6, but I don't think we can without really cutting into the fund balance. So I agree, though, that we can use the fund balance, and I think being real careful moving ahead next year we'll have enough money to be able to juggle this around better next year.
Council Wise?
Yeah, I agree with Councilor Platts about it's really hard to come up with looking through this. I mean, you could say a number, but the whole thing is where is it going to come from? I would like to see it be somewhere around 6, probably under 6, if we could. I agree somewhat on the side of Councilor Gary about that. So, but where are we going to end up? Are we going to end up at 5.8, 5.9, and it's something that can be worked out? I'm totally in favor of that. The more that we can go down, the better it's going to be for our citizens, and I totally agree with Councilor Milks on that. I am very concerned with our citizens and having high tax increases on them when they're already struggling with what's going on in this economy, and that truly is one thing that I'm concerned about. So we're here to look at this and try to find out ways. If we can be under 6, that's great. But if we're around 6, that's kind of where it is. So,
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Council Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we have so much money in our fund balance, we should be using it to help lower the taxes for all people. I am very cautious about getting into it because we are our butts against the wall with this budget. A lot of it's salary increases. I think it's also we've got a little bit more staff, not so much the low-end staff, but high-end staff. Next year, we're going to probably be facing the same thing because people are going to be getting another raise, our employees and stuff, so we're still going to have to find a way to make sure that they get paid as well as anything else that happens through inflation. I'm afraid of getting into the fund balance and bringing it down too low because we're going to need it for other things, especially if we do go ahead with the oh heck. Anyways, if we go ahead on paying on our bonds, I don't want to chase those residents that have been here all their lives away and just have all the new ones that come in have to pick up all the burdens for what should be done fairly for everybody. And I don't think we're doing a good job of this. We have not really worked the budgets in the last few years, and now we're paying the price for what we didn't do in the past.
So just a couple points of clarification. I would remind the council that currently in the manager's proposed budget, there's $1.5 million in fund balance that's going to offset tax increases. So the use of the fund balance we're talking about is in addition to that. The other thing, one of the councilors pointed out the potential overtaxation. Some of the fund balance in the past comes from projects that come in lower than the estimated price. Some positions that are vacant even though they're in the hiring funnel during the year, and potentially some from an overestimate of revenue. And remember that in the earlier meeting, the council increased our revenue line by $450,000 to offset this very issue of potential overtaxation. So we increased our estimate on general revenue sharing by $450,000. I guess having heard from the councilors, I know, Mr. Manager, there's been discussions off and on with some of the councilors since the last meeting and discussions with staff. Have you been able to identify any other potential areas of savings in the budget?
So I have spent some time with the directors going through based on some of the emails that had come from many of you. And so we do have some recommendations. I think it gets you a little closer. What you have to realize is that a lot of those just means you're putting off this year what you'll be paying for next year. And sometimes that's increasing it even a little further because it's not moving forward on a certain project and saying, okay, we'll hold the line where we think we're going to be coming in at. We talked about the consolidation of utilities. We're putting that all within our facilities and energy department. There's some estimates that are in there. We'll see where those land, what they come in at. But there are some savings that going through that we've said, again, not savings as much as, putting it off for a future year or for other future budget dollars that might come in, whether it's another source. I think, with what the councilors were relating to regarding fund balance, there's some, finance directors don't like to use this term, but some use the term as tax stabilization is really what that fund balance tends to do. It's important to be mindful too that if next year, like right now it's 1.5, I didn't make any increase in that from the previous year. We had 1.5 the previous year as well. And so I've held that line. Based on what we know is coming in, you certainly have room between around $250,000 to $500,000 that you could move in that, knowing that next year that might be one of those cliffs that we talk about of, all right, we're back down to 1.5. That means we need to find that 250 or 500,000 somewhere else within the budget if we're looking to try to control those costs. I think Councilor Cowan's comment regarding the salary increases being a one-time hit, and that's what we look at fund balance for. If you were to look at the previous year's budget, it was about $2.5 million that we increased the budget on. Those were all things except for, a lot of the contracts that had come in later on. And so in this budget, you have every salary increase is for FY25 is in this budget. It's listed for every department. So those are already baked into this budget. So it's not, as what Councilor Gary said, you're not going to be looking at in FY26 picking up any increases for the FY25 salaries. They are put in here, and they're all built in with each department as well. And so, and that's something we've never done. Usually it's, we're estimating it. It might be in salary reserve. It's not negotiated yet, but all these contracts are currently negotiated, and so they're in there. That does not prevent a wage reopener, which many of you have dealt with and we've moved through in the past. What I will provide you is, or Kelsey will, thanks. So these are some other department expenditure reductions that you could look at. Many of them, what it does is it delays staff hiring. What are the impacts on that? Means that certain projects might not happen as a result of it. Current vacancies might go longer than what we try to shoot for is that 90-day window of a vacancy, getting somebody back in, getting them back where they need to be. Those are on average standardized positions. That doesn't include a fire or a police position, which takes a great deal more time once we have that vacancy. Those costs come in, but it takes close to 6 months before a police officer is ready to go on the road and start offsetting overtime. And so these are reductions that do not impact overtime. There'll be positions where there's vacancies that do not have that direct impact. There's no specific position when I outline the salary reductions. It just means there's positions within that department that when a position becomes available in FY25, that department manager will need to hold that position until they make up for that $20,000 or $25,000 delayed hiring. And so that's what we've looked at there. The department reductions are based off from some utilities. I think Councilor Platts had talked about utilities and maybe some other training costs. And so that's that, finding a couple dollars here and there. That's where that dollar amount comes from, except for 15,000 of it. And that 15,000 came from the capital expenditure account. When we gave the CIP presentation, the airport manager recognized that when we carried over his budget sheet into the spreadsheet, there was a zero missing on there. I had 15,000 instead of 150,000. So that 150,000 is brought back into the CIP, but taken out of the capital expenditure for that pavement management. The pavement management, the 15,000 is what, for if it would have been just assessing the pavement, but there was actually dollars in there to actually do some of the apron paving that's needed at the airport. So, so that 150 is now added back into your CIP sheet, which we'll hand to you, and we reduced the 15,000 from the capital expenditure. That's in that $30,000 reduction that you see on that. So that means, and then 25,000 out of salary reserve, and that gets you at 150,000 within department reductions that we were able to make. And then, as I mentioned before, as a starting point, really that 250,000 for the fund balance. That's a combined adjustment for the budget of $400,000. At $400,000, that puts you at a city tax rate of 24.16, an increase of $1.41, or a 6.2% increase on the budget. So it gets you a little under the 6.5, gets you close to that 6.21. Remember that we're using the assessed value of last year. All indication is your assessed value is going to increase with no other market adjustments, nothing else. Your assessed value is going to increase based on, what we've looked at historically, not with what I've had conversations with the city assessor, because she doesn't like me to have any conversations with her when we're doing the budget. So we would do that afterwards when it gets closer to, once they've done all their work. But if we look historically, you'll make up close to that 0.2% within an increased assessed value, which will get you pretty close to 6%. Again, that's estimates. I don't have any hard numbers on that. I can tell you 6.21 based off from where we are with the assessed value from last year.
Just to be clear, even if the assessed value goes up, the total tax levy is not going to change. It's just going to change the mill rate. The amount, the check that the citizen would write to pay their taxes isn't going to be any different.
Yeah, you'll see. Yeah, you're going to see a change within the mill rate. I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah,
Councilor Mills?
yeah. That $1.41 is what you're going to see change within the mill rate.
Yeah, I was looking to, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager, addressing the position changes
Yeah.
document.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can take staff from another resource to address the GA eligibility coordinator? And as that's hopefully something that is going to be potentially a temporary, or in the future, perhaps we'll go from the state only funding 70% of the liability they're putting on us to an increased number, and that perhaps in the future, we might be able to allocate more resources to that. The question would be, at this point, do we push the executive assistant position to next year? As much as Kelsey, I'm sure, would be devastated at that.
It's already
That
reduced.
one's
It's
already
already
been
eliminated.
We're already eliminated
We
that?
already eliminated that.
My apologies?
Yeah.
And the senior appraiser
We delayed that to January.
to January. Okay, that's right. And then, long range, the long range?
January as well.
January?
Yep.
So is that reflected in these numbers?
Those are
that
in the
you gave-
budget numbers
In
now.
the numbers that you
Yep.
just gave us? Okay.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah, I guess to address the GA, if what we will do is, if the demand for services shifts, that's not a position that, you would look to, okay, where else does that position go? And we shifted a position from CDBG over to assist in that. That means there would be a potential program that the grant would pay for later on. And so we would look at that. So,
'Cause
but
that
we wouldn't
number is
keep
from
that
a grant.
forever.
So,
That number is a granted position that's going to move to a budgeted position.
It's already in there as a budgeted
That's
position.
what that-
That can float different ways depending on where the needs are within CDBG.
so is it fair to say, my understanding is we flex this thing from 1 to 3 this year based on demand and the statutory requirement that we process these GA applications within a certain time frame. And so to Councilor Milks's point, if the demand goes down, I'm assuming you'll flex this back the other way and take the person off, or 1 or 2. If it went back to what it was last year, we'd be back down to 1 person, and we would take them off the general budget, correct?
That's correct, yeah. And it would either work within the CDBG funding for other programming that's driven by the grant costs and grant needs, or that position just wouldn't be available anymore. So, yes. Yeah, we wouldn't need to keep that if the demand wasn't there. That's true.
And I have a question, looking ahead for the school department, and I realize that this is I'm looking this way because that's where the mic is, but over here. I know that there's a study underway about buildings, elementary schools, and my question is capacity of the schools in Edward Little, the junior high, and our aging elementary schools, particularly Walton, and I know that Washburn is over capacity, and we've got don't we have trailers and stuff in Washburn? Looking at the facilities, as the recovery, the money that we had from the Lake Street school closing, that was significant. And that, do we have the capacity to move students from, my thought is, if we took the junior high and moved them into the high school, where we're below capacity, and I don't know whether that capacity exists or not, and take 2 elementary schools and move them into the junior high, and the 2 wings of the junior high. And I realize that that's going to cause some distress and problems in our city, but I would rather have our students have classrooms and our teachers have jobs, and if it means we have to eliminate buildings, then I would rather do that than eliminate teachers and classrooms. So I don't know if that capacity is there or not, but to me, that looks like, for eyeball test, that those moving that around the capacity might be there, and with the new school, that we'd be maximizing that. So I don't know if that's a potential for the future that the school department can look at.
You
need
said
to-
push.
Yeah,
Push and
to
hold.
Hold it down. Well, Councilor Milks, thank you very much for the opportunity to address that critical issue that I think is facing the school department as well as the city, because it's not just a school department issue, it really faces all of the citizens in Auburn. We have several buildings that are over 100 years old or approaching 100 years old, and the study that you referenced has been completed, and costs have been provided to the school department, and they are significant. And Dr. Doris is leading a committee now that is working to identify what may be the plan to move forward to address the facilities, and in some cases, the condition that they're in, the enrollment of the school department, which I think is a well-known fact, is shrinking, and in some cases precariously dropping, especially in New Auburn. And I think that there will be some hard policy decisions as well as some financial decisions that these folks are going to have to wrestle with in the very near term.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I appreciate that.
Dr. Brown, my recollection is that the committee that you referenced, their schedule is to try to wrap up their recommendations by late fall. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
So I think that it might be important for the council to make sure that the school board understands that it would be very beneficial for this body in considering the budget for the next fiscal year, that strategy be identified and any potential closures in the discussion in time for the next budget year. Be happy to see if there's any comments on that by the council.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
Any other questions about school facilities? Great. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Manager, just one follow-up question here on salary. So the Public Works, Fire Department, Police Department salaries that are in here, I think what I heard you say is there's no overtime offset for those. That's positions moving through a hiring funnel that will cause that savings, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, those are, as we've talked about, those are positions that are constantly, revolving positions. And so it would be the right timing. So if you take a look at Public Works, we wouldn't, if there was a vacancy that became available just before winter services, we wouldn't use that position. We'd wait for a spring vacancy and then delay the hiring in spring, which would allow us to get to where we need to be without any reductions.
With a strategy
Yeah.
to get those salary savings from temporary vacancies without incurring overtime
That's
costs,
correct.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there other questions by the council on the expense reductions on the sheet that the manager circulated? Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't a cost reduction on what the good manager has provided. Seeing that we're expecting an awful lot out of the manager in our departments about trying to cut and save, I would recommend that we, as counselors, go back to what our salaries were in the two previous councils, when it was $1,800 a year. That would be about a $1,200 cut for each of us. According to the charter, we cannot increase our salaries during a sitting council, but it doesn't say we cannot, and it's been ruled before that we can cut our salaries, especially during hard times. And this is one of the hard times. And so I would like to do the proposal that we cut ourselves back to 18 from 4,000, an appropriate cut for you too, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions or discussion by the council on Councilor Gary's proposal? Councilor Whiting?
I have no problem with that. I wasn't necessarily in favor of the increase, but I voted for it, I think. So I guess that sort of trumps that statement. But I just want to compliment the city manager and staff on the efforts they made. I mean, 7 different areas of cuts to get down to 6.21%. And then I think with, the assessor's work to be done by this summer, we'll find that it does get under 6%. We don't know that for certain, but it appears that that will be the case, which is meeting the goals of most of the council, I think.
Yeah, just to be clear, the assessor's work isn't going to change the amount of the tax levy, right? So it may move between categories a slight bit depending upon what the assessment adjustment is. So any further questions or comments about the expense reductions?
Mr. Mayor, I had
Yeah.
a question for the manager. Mr. Manager, could you tell me, actually, or Kelsey, you might know the answer to this, but with the so it was 1.5 million in fund balance budgeted for FY 23-24. Do we have a rough sense of how much of that? Are we going to hit it on 1.5? Are we short? Are we over that? I know we're not done our fiscal year yet.
We typically, in the recent time, and Kelsey can confirm this, but we haven't been drawing down that fund balance, because if we did, it would just go right back into the general fund. So there hasn't been a need to actually draw down that 1.5 million.
Just trying to understand the implications of increasing our budget line item by $250,000 if in fact we're not spending that. Anyway, I understand it's where that money ends up. It's kind of all accounting at some point, but
Yeah,
Thank
yeah. So, I mean, and even putting it at 2 million, it would be hard for us to come in at. If anything, a lot of our departments are coming in a lot closer to their budgets than they had been in previous years because the workforce has shifted. So could there be a need for that? There could be. I think we're going to come in pretty healthy on the state revenue share, which is why we made those increases this year. And so that's going to help offset. But it's a little hard to predict right now, but I think if we do pull this year, it'll probably be somewhere close to half of what we budgeted in FY '24. We'll need to pull out of that fund balance line item revenue account to help offset. But we typically will also pull like salary reserve first. And so if you look back at salary reserve, the actual salary reserve 2 years ago, I think we might have pulled around 30,000, somewhere's in there. 25. So, so we'll grab that usually because it's offsetting some salary contract that we had done, and so we'll pull that first. So that's another, and for the FY '24 budget, that's 500,000 that's in there currently. And so, so yeah, it's unlikely whether or not we'll grab that, the fund balance, but, it's always available, but, so that means that would carry over again. And that's not within the numbers that we were sharing, because that now carries over in the FY '24 audit.
I guess that's kind of the source of my question, is trying to understand how we treat that.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to be rating this fund balance every year for things that we just need to have in our operating budget. But at the same time, those comments give me a little more comfort knowing that, it's a slush fund that we don't obliterate every year.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
great to know.
Yeah.
Counselor Cowan?
Just to follow up on Councilor Gary's proposal, personally, I would be willing to reduce my portion. It's actually something I wondered about as I was looking at the reality that we were going to be asking other departments. So I thank you for raising it. I don't know whether that's something we'd want to say across the board, but I personally would be able, as a gesture of thanks to the departments doing great work, as well as the school department. We asked them to cut another position that I know was already a valuable position. So I think, across the board, everyone's doing that. So.
We'll have to get legal to weigh in on that, because even though it references increase, as Councilor Gary stated, it also references that any changes impacts the next elected term. And so, so I don't know, I'd have to get some legal input on whether or not that would actually have any impact on this fiscal year.
Other questions? Counselor Walker?
Yeah, would you please explain the recycling, deposit, and collection? One of them, we got 52% there, which is, I know we held money over last year or whatever. Would you explain that out so we all know what's going on with the recycling world?
Yeah, we did not end up holding it over because we reinstated recycling. And so that money that we were originally going to hold over, that we were going to use for bins, went right back into the actual service costs. So when you're looking at that line item, so I guess that's the answer to the one point, Councilor Walker, is that there was nothing that was carried over. I currently have a 6-month extension on the contract. We had asked for a 1-year extension, and it came in at a 6-month, which only gets me to December. So I need to go back with Casella to look at what the additional 6-month extension would mean for us. And so we're in a little bit of limbo on that contract right now. So the increase that you see in here is the direct cost increase for the contract. What we don't have room in this budget for that we had room in the previous year, because of where the contract came in, was the encampment cleanups. We were using this line item to offset those costs for encampment cleanups. That's well over 30 encampments that were cleaned up throughout the year. Come July 1st, we're going to have to work as a team to talk about where that's at, but I have not included that in this budget. The goal here is that they were all cleaned, and now let's keep them clean and try to work with those property owners where those encampments were at, and try to hold the line on that. Now, we know today, certainly the court heard arguments regarding some of these encampments, and we'll hear more about what the impacts will be moving forward. But so right now, that's where we're at on that line item. I don't know if the further question, Councilor Walker, was regarding the breakdown of the cost from disposal to collections, but that Those numbers right there are what we have for a 6-month extension, and hoping that we hold that line on those for the next 6 months to extend it to June 30th.
Yeah, just to remind the council on the recycling collection, if you look at the FY '24 approved at $189,000, that was the approved budget prior to the discontinuation of curbside pickup. When curbside pickup was reinstated, it was $153,000 for 7 months. So what happened was we gained 2 pickups per year, right? We went from twice a month to every other week, so we went from 24 to 26 pickups, but we also decreased the materials to be picked up because a number of materials that were previously recyclable are no longer being sent to the recycling center. So this increase only reflects the same service level we have today at an increased monthly cost, and I think it would be realistic for the council to assume that the reason that we could only get a 6-month extension is that the provider is very hesitant to continue any further than that at this current rate, and I would expect that when this contract expires and we do the next bids, that you're going to see a substantial increase. So we've had some discussions with the manager about potential alternative ways to do the collection. We'll have to see how this plays out. But I would not expect these rates to be going down any at all.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right, Mayor. They're going to increase because and I'm sure the other reason regarding the only a 6-month extension is they're still trying to determine how soon can they put the automatic collection system in place. And if they do that, then they don't want to commit for a full year if they can get the resources that they need to go to automation. So,
Council Wajda.
Thank you. When it comes to if it's going to go to that point, which we'll develop now, I mean, if we were to do it ourselves, I mean, the rates that we take that were for recycling, I mean, is it going to be break even, or we're losing money at that point with how much recycling we're taking in? Is this program going to be able to pay for itself, or are we just going to be spending more money?
you will always lose money on recycling. There's no path forward on making or breaking even on recycling collection. No community does. That's not unique to Auburn.
Okay. Do you know, or can you get me later on how much is it lower by that we would take in roughly for Auburn? Do you know those numbers, or could you give me those?
I can tell you what the market is today.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you, I can't forecast too much in advance of that.
Right.
But,
So these budget numbers in recycling disposal, that's the net after the revenue. So the way it works is that this line that says recycling disposal is tipping fees at the single sort facility, and those tipping fees are calculated after they estimate what their revenue is going to be from the sale of the recycling. So as the manager said, every community in the state, if you want to think of at the single sort facility, everyone has to pay to take it. No one is breaking even or generating revenue on recycling. It's just not.
just a cost of service.
Yeah, it's not just the cost of doing it.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd remind the council is the SNRB has to report back one of the meetings in August. Because that was the period in time that the manager needed information, their recommendations about recycling going forward, to be able to start preparations for budget. So we're going to have to see what happens with a 6-month contract. We may have to accelerate that effort if we're going to have a contract earlier than a year.
Not every city also has its own burning plant, though, that we can actually push. These numbers should be compared to what it would cost us to burn this stuff and not just look at it as we can recycle in this city, because we have another choice, and we shouldn't be paying through the nose to recycle stuff that we can burn in our own plant here for a lot less money than what we're doing now.
Yes, I think that's a discussion we'll have to have. I think there's a lot of people in the community that would not agree that we should just burn it just because we can. So when we hear back from the SNRB, we can have that discussion about whether we should send everything to the incinerator or whether we should continue recycling.
I mean,
Councilman.
ultimately, that's a service. It's a service that so if we're kind of cut us 2 school teachers or recycling, or a fireman or recycling. And when folks, I don't know what the percentage that access the recycling, but it's not preventing them from recycling. It's just, wouldn't pick it up curbside, but it's not preventing them from taking part in recycling. So that's, again, we're looking at cutting services. And that's,
Oh, yeah,
that's a
it's
service.
very, very valid
And I understand
point.
people
It-
get
it-
very upset about that, but that's what we're talking about. It's either raise taxes or cut services, so.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that, to Councilor Milks's point, it's a collection line, right? The disposal isn't gonna change whether you drop it off at the roll-offs or whether they do curbside. But, yeah, going forward, it's certainly going to be a point of discussion like every other service, and what we can afford and what we can't afford. Other questions on expenses here? If not, we'll move forward and have some discussion about application of additional fund balance. So the manager suggested on the handout an additional $250,000 that gets us down to 6.21%. Just back of the napkin math, each tenth is about another 100,000. Mr. Manager, would you agree with that? So just as some context for the discussion, if we apply an additional 250,000, it'll get us to 6.21. Every $100,000 after that would decrease it by approximately 0.1, the total tax levy. Thoughts on that by the council? Council Whiting.
Just a comment that we're kind of working with one hand tied behind our back, because we're not finding out about the fund balance in a very timely manner, because the audit is just really slow. And I think it's going to be better this year, from what I understand, but it's really hard for the city management to even talk about that subject based on the, really difficult time of procuring audit services and then getting them done on a timely basis.
So just, Mr. Manager, make sure I don't go off the highway here. So my understanding would be, we'd be estimating that the fund balance from the prior year audit would come in someplace conservatively around $3 million. We've tagged about 1.35 million of that towards the building procurement that will save us several $1 million more than that in the long run. So if you added this 250 in there, you're probably estimating someplace when the audit comes in around 1.5 million in fund balance, thereabouts. Would you
That's
agree?
correct.
Is that about
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Does that help, Council Whiting?
And
Council
that
Mills?
puts us towards the top of the recommended range.
Well, we're
14%.
just below the top of the recommended range now, and
Currently,
it would be far less than 1.5 million for us to hit. Remember, the overall guidance for municipalities is 16%. Our policy is 14, and we're just barely below that now. So, with what we talked about with the procurement down of the building on Kitty Hawk and an additional 250 here, that fund balance, when the audit comes in, is very, very likely to push us above the 14%, and then that will trigger the requirement that the council review that and determine what to do with the excess. Councilor Milks?
I support the 6.21 budget, so everybody knows where we're at. And I do want us to seriously look at, as a council, start thinking about how are we gonna grow our city? How are we gonna grow? Because cutting or raising taxes are not not the only two options, and there are areas that we can grow the city. And so I'd like to throw that out there as but I'll vote for the 6.21.
Councilor Walker.
I'm with you.
I'll throw in my support as well. I think it's responsible to add another $250,000 into the fund balance. I think given what we have in there now, given what we're pulling, what the audit should show from this past fiscal year, I think it's a responsible move, and I would support it.
Any other comments? Councilor Cowan?
I will too.
Same here.
Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not support it. I do support growth in certain parts of our city that it can better deal with it than the proposed development up around our lake.
Yeah, look, Councilor Milks has a good point about growth. I think the question is going to be what the net revenue is, right? Just because your gross tax revenue goes up, you're still going to have service costs that are associated with growth. I think we're going to have, there's things in the pipeline that are going to be coming before the planning board, I think, over the next 4 or 5 months. That'll give us an opportunity to perhaps explore that further and look at what that tax revenue is, what the types of developments are, what the service is, and what net revenue we're getting to give us an idea about what potential positive impacts on a future budget might be through growth. Especially, a lot of this will probably be residential development, which has a higher service load than, say, like industrial or commercial. But I think we'll have some opportunity to look at that over the next 4 or 5 months and get a better sense of what that might look like. Further from the council? Council Eisner?
Yeah, the two options is, like, I agree. It's either growth or raise taxes. Like I said, I mean, we're at 6.2. I mean, I appreciate the manager coming back with this. I mean, if it can be worked a little bit more to get it down to that 6, I'm for it. That's my main concern is struggling citizens. And if we can get it down a little bit more to 6, then you've got me as a vote. But I won't vote for it at 6.2.
Is your suggestion to increase the $250,000 in the fund balance to $450,000 to get to 6? That would be one way to do it. The other way would be to get down to 6, we'd need to find approximately $200,000 more to cut.
$375. So the fund balance would go to, it's an additional, so it's $375,000 in the fund balance to get to just below 6%.
Just below 6, so
Yeah.
an extra 175. Thank you.
Yep.
Is that, Councilor Wisner, is your suggestion to increase the application of fund balance or to look for additional budget cuts?
If we can look to find or get close to that number, then I would suggest looking a little bit more. If not, then it's the fund balance.
I would support the fund balance if that's what we need to get there.
Other councilors' thoughts on increasing the fund balance from $250,000 to $375,000 to get to basically down to a total tax levy of 6%?
I'd support it.
Perhaps it's because I live in the world of multi-year averages when I'm looking at data, but it seems to me that gives us the opportunity to potentially, lower this year and then continue something that might be, we'll have an increase, but it won't be as bad in future years. So I'd support that as well.
I guess I would support that, but I would also support not reducing the fund balance if we don't need to, if we find that we don't need to. Like, we could adjust the budget later on.
Yeah, I think that the city manager's earlier comments about a cliff are well taken, but I think that increasing this to 375,000 in this particular circumstance, since a lot of this is driven by one-time huge bumps in salary, I don't think you're going to see that next year. So it's not like we're saying, let's take 175,000, offset some, costs that we have every year, knowing that next year we got to make that 175 up. So I think that increasing it to 375 is a relatively low risk, and it does get us down to the 6%.
5.96.
Better yet.
See, sounds nice.
Any other thoughts on that?
I guess just to reemphasize what you just said, Mayor Harmon, because the whole reason I proposed this in the beginning is because my understanding in our discussions were we had a substantially larger amount of dual cost of living increase, and so I think it's important for our the members of the residents of Auburn to understand that this should be a one-time thing, that they're I'm agreeing to 375 because I believe that we're not going to hit that cliff, and I'm not committing to doing that every year. So,
Yeah, I think that's the sense of it, that there would not be an assumption that would be carrying 1.875 going forward into the next year. This $375,000 addition would be a one-time application.
So, Mr. Mayor, what we would do is Kelsey would prepare the documents for the council meeting on Monday night to have the council approved numbers with these adjustments. And so your motion that you would be making would be to adopt the city council approved as presented, so that you won't need to go through and make amendments to each one of those line items. I think we have consensus here for us to go ahead and make those changes, and then that would be the dollar number that you're factoring. We will also have prepared the adoption of the school budget. I know the school committee is meeting on Wednesday, and they will hopefully pass their school budget at that time. I think they've done great work to come in at the number that they're at. From this meeting, no further changes to the school within their budget. And then I'm sure the superintendent or our new superintendent will lead the discussion with the school committee chair regarding facilities in the future when the report is ready to move forward. So I think we feel good that we have all the numbers that we need to move forward on that. We will take a look at the probably your following meeting, your second meeting in May, is where we'll probably have a workshop to talk about CIP. You have the numbers now. That workshop at that meeting will allow you to have the final discussion regarding CIP, and then have your first and second reading at your meetings in June. We can go beyond that too. We're not hitting any real hard deadline here, but that at least gives you time to really work through your CIP, that you have at least what I have recommended anyway. Then it's for council, it's your decision on how you'd like to make adjustments to that.
So we'll talk about the CIP here in a second. Any further thoughts or questions by the council about the preparation of the manager's proposed budget for the first reading at the next meeting?
It'll be the council proposed. So mine.
Excuse me, council proposal.
Yep.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Just a point of clarification. So you're gonna, like I talked about, go through one more look at it, see how much you can bring it down by, and then look at subsidizing with the fund balance afterwards to try and meet that mark. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So if we find anything else, we'll reduce the fund balance, is what I'm hearing, and then we'll make those adjustments, and then you obviously can make changes at that time. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? On the CIP, just so I'm clear, we had a discussion about Merrow Road at the last meeting. Merrow Road is not included in this sheet, right?
That's correct.
And if it's not included in this year, what would be the plan going forward?
So I will have engineering provide for you at that, when you're ready for the CIP workshop, and I think it'll be that second meeting in May. We'll have some numbers, and we'll have a good report on timing to get that project scoped out, designed, and what the turnaround would be on that project. So we'll have all that for you at the workshop.
That would be helpful, because I think that it's a very expensive single project, and we really only have the FY25 CIP or the FY26, or we're going to be doing that in the same time frame that we're going to have the increased debt load and the increased debt payments for the new public safety building.
That's correct.
Any other questions by the council regarding the upcoming schedule for CIP or the general budget? Any other business for the council tonight? If not, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
First night of Passover to